Hi, everybody. Welcome to the book event for Fury, Women's Lived Experiences During the Trump Era. I am Beth Wong, and I work in events at Politics and Prose. We thank you so much for joining us in this new format, this brave new world, where we're continuing to bring our proud tradition of Politics and Prose author events to you in your home. This is a new platform for us. We've only been doing it for a couple of weeks, and we really appreciate your patience as we become more comfortable with the technical aspects. If anything slows or freezes, we'll be working on it on the back end. So just bear with us. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for tuning in this afternoon. These really uncertain times are devastating to your local businesses, and that includes Politics and Prose. So any book purchases, all book purchases from today, from yesterday, from tomorrow are what are keeping us in business and allow us to bring authors and their new books to our community. Welcome back. If it's your first time joining us, if it's your first time joining us, I have some notes on the functionality of Crowdcast. At any time during the event today, you can hit the green button at the bottom of your screen to purchase this afternoon's book on Politics and Prose's website. We're currently offering free media mail shipping on all orders, and your online purchase, of course, goes to support our small business that needs its loyal customers now more than ever. Just like at all our in-person events, you're able to ask the authors a question tonight by clicking on Ask a Question. Also, at the bottom of your screen, I see there's already a question in there. Can't wait to read it. So you can submit your question there as well as read other people's questions and vote for the ones you'd like to hear read most with the up and down arrows. A reminder that unlike our in-person events, the author, hosts, and the other audience members cannot see you through your screen. We welcome you in your Sunday clothes. We're just really glad you're here. On to today's event. In their new anthology, Fury, Women's Lived Experiences During the Trump Era, which they're launching today. This is their first event for it, and we're so proud to be hosting it. Co-editors Amy Roost and Alissa Hirshfeld-Flores bring together a diverse chorus of women who reveal the impact of and response to Donald Trump's behavior, words, and presidency. This afternoon, Amy and Alissa are joined in conversation with Shannon Brescher Shea, a DC-based writer, an environmental activist, and contributor to the anthology. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to bring Amy, Alissa, and Shannon to your screens.
Hi, all. I'm Amy Roost, and thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. It's been kind of a challenging time, having had several book events rescheduled, and this one going virtual, which is actually really exciting. This is kind of fun. And as Beth mentioned, this is our launch today, so we're very excited. And I'm coming from San Diego, and I have perpetual sunny weather, 72 degrees, which probably sounds really great to all of you, except it's sort of a cruel joke when you're in quarantine. So here I am inside, and I lived in DC for 9 years. So DC is like a second home to me. I still have many friends there. I lived in Foggy Bottom and Adams Morgan, Woodley Park for a brief stint, and just around the corner from Politics and Prose in Cleveland Park. And I know that everybody's enjoying the cherry blossoms virtually right now. And this is one of my favorite times of year in DC. So welcome to all of the DC folks who joined us. And I know there's lots of people from other places as well. So welcome to you. I wanted to just address first, before I read an excerpt from the essay that I wrote for Fury, why I wrote this book and or put this collection together, I should say, along with Alissa. About a couple months after Trump was elected, my husband, who's a clinical psychologist, would come home from work and tell me that a lot of his patients, the aggregate of patients, were very distressed about the current political state. And this was shortly after the election. And I was as well. But I was also going through a bit of personal trauma at the time, which I will get to in my essay. And so just feeling very traumatized, distressed. I think there's a sort of a continuum of what people were feeling, but I would say mine was mostly, I would say mine definitely fell into trauma. I just began to wonder like what other people were going through, especially women. And so I put out a call for submissions, and lo and behold, over 200 women responded to that call for submissions. And so I decided then it would be my duty essentially to put this work together. And I had two goals in mind. The first was to give women a voice during this period, and to make sure that the reaction of women wasn't going unnoted. I believe that the collection, and when you read it, I think you'll find this would really help people to know that they weren't alone going through some of what we're witnessing with Trump's policies and behavior. And then my second goal, and I'll just read this from the preface, is decades from now, much will have been written and documented about Donald Trump's presidency. Just as the news media should not focus excessive attention on a deranged assailant after a mass shooting, neither should any future generation focus all of its attention on the deranged person currently occupying the Oval Office. Instead, let this collection of authentic voices stand as a monument to those who suffered and coped, persevered and overcame, and marched and fought for justice during the Trump era. If this book is ignored today, but read in even one classroom 100 years from now, it would make every sacrifice you read about in this collection worthwhile. So I'm kind of a documentarian at heart, and I really wanted this to serve to document these times for future generations. And then my final goal, which I'm just adding today, is that that the collection, that Fury becomes a bestseller, and Donald Trump tweets about it, and then we'll get the Trump bump. So if you work for the administration or happen to know anybody who does, please get it in Donald Trump's hands so he can say something nasty about it, and everybody will run out and buy it. So I'm going to read from my essay. It's called New Normal, and I'm going to jump around a little bit. I'll start at the beginning and then explain where it goes from there. It's written, it's like an annotated diary. October 28th, 2016. Yet another woman has accused Donald Trump of touching her inappropriately. He dismisses her as a porn star and says sarcastically, "Oh, I'm sure she's never been grabbed before." At a rally, Trump revels in the news that the FBI is reopening Hillary's private email investigation. "I think this changes everything," he tells the jeering crowd, who shout, "Lock her up, lock her up." October 31st, 2016. I spend the day readying the condo and burning off nervous energy in anticipation of my son's arrival. I place Post-it notes everywhere I can think of. The Post-it on the kitchen cupboard reads, "Bowls and plates." The drawer below is labeled silverware. The toaster is simply toaster. I roll up the throw rug in the entryway, afraid it might pose a tripping hazard. I hang a whiteboard and calendar in Spencer's old bedroom while awaiting delivery of the hospital bed. And I remember the doctor's advice that Spencer should avoid alcohol while recovering from his strokes and subsequent brain surgeries. I empty the refrigerator of beer and wine so as not to present a temptation. While hiding it in the storage locker beneath the stairs, I decide that as an act of solidarity, I too will refrain from drinking. A new normal is about to begin, one that is outside the protective womb of the hospital where I spent 48 of 56 days at Spencer's bedside. At Spencer's bedside, waiting, tending, and advocating. I'm relieved he's been discharged and also terrified to think that I'm about to assume the roles of doctor, nurse, and therapist, in addition to full-time cheerleader. I haven't yet managed to overcome the shocks to my body and psyche from his hospitalization, much less gather my own inner strength. How will I help him gather his? I make pumpkin spice whoopie pies, a Halloween tradition in our family. Perhaps tasting these will jog Spencer's memory of Halloween's past. Like the year he was buzzed to Brother Stewart's Woody, or the time he sat patiently while I painted his face to look like Gene Simmons of the rock band Kiss. Maybe he'll be reminded of the annual pumpkin carving parties we hosted in our driveway. Surely he'll recall the carving party that was canceled on the day we were evacuated ahead of the wildfires clawing their way toward our backyard. My husband, Ain, arrives home from work, followed in short order by his daughter, Lindsay, and her 2 children. Maddie is dressed as the Incredible Hulk. Baby Grace is a tiny pea in a pod. I find an old t-shirt and write nasty across it with a black Sharpie, don a witch's hat, and we all head out for a quick round of trick-or-treating prior to Spencer's arrival. Finally, Spencer is home along with Stuart, who has accompanied Spencer on the flight from Seattle. My 2 sons, one tall and athletic, the other short and brainy, have both survived multiple brain surgeries. They each grab a whoopie pie, plop down on the sofa good-naturedly, and compare the scars across their respective skulls to see whose is longer. Brain malformations, etiologies unknown and, according to doctors, unrelated, and near-death experiences have brought these 2 very different brothers closer. My personal cheering squad, Ain and Lindsay, pull up chairs, and Maddie and Grace, 2 sources of joy during what has been an otherwise joyless time, spread their candy out on the floor. I sit for the first time all day, look around the room, and contentedly bite into my own whoopie pie. So the next few days are consumed with trying to get Spencer into a rehab facility, brain injury rehab facility, and the diary accounts for different statements that Trump has made along the campaign trail. And so now I'll pick up on the day after the election. For the second time in 10 days, I'm faced with a new normal. Donald Trump is the president-elect. While waiting for the coffee to brew, I glance at Facebook on my phone. The first thing I see are celebratory remarks about Trump's victory from a Christian fundamentalist high school friend who rarely posts to social media. Each post ends with the words, "Praise be to God," as if God somehow ordained the election results. I unfriend her. Next, I come across a comment by a friend of my stepson's, a white male millennial. It reads, "Apparently, lots of women like having their pussies grabbed." I respond, "Dear white men, seriously, for just one day, shut the fuck up. Take some time to reflect, bros, and have a good, long look in the mirror. What have you done in your life to set women back or kept them from rising up? Have you too stereotyped women in your lifetime? Have you consciously or unconsciously objectified women and contributed to voters having such a low regard for women that they would elect a race-baiting, misogynistic liar to be president?" Later in the morning, Stuart texts me photos of his college library, where overnight someone spray painted swastikas on the bathroom walls. I can't take it. I also can't look away. November 10th, 2016. I listened to Trump's press conference on my way home from dropping Spencer off at rehab. He mentions that he's considering keeping 2 provisions of the Affordable Care Act, the prohibition against insurers denying coverage because of a patient's pre-existing condition, a provision both Stuart and Spencer will depend on their entire lives, and the one that allows parents to keep their children on their insurance plans until they turn 26, which currently applies to both my sons. Hearing that Trump will preserve the key components of Obamacare is a massive relief, until a commentator points out that Trump's plan will never work. Without a mandate for everyone to purchase health insurance, the pre-existing condition provision would send insurance companies into a death roll. I've gone through life blithely assuming I could handle anything thrown my way. I'm forced to prove it. Now that I'm forced to prove it, I'm not sure I can. My reserves are all used up. I just want someone to hug me, hold my hand, leave flowers on my doorstep, bring me a hot roast beef sandwich with extra cheese, or simply text me a funny cat video. I've suffered a crack or two or three, and I'm afraid I won't be able to hold myself together much longer. Spencer, who knows nothing of my gossamer thin nerves, arrives home depressed. Who can blame him? One day he's working his way towards a college degree in engineering, mountain biking and snowboarding on the weekends. And the next day he's using a walker and can't find his way to take out the trash. I suggest we go to the beach and let nature work its magic. As we amble north along the shoreline, mist settles on our matching curls, salt rims our lips, and the rhythm of the waves steadies our breathing. When the stars come out, we turn back for home, ready to once again face reality. A dear friend calls to check up on me. I confide, I'm barely hanging on. She, a recovering alcoholic, offers me some ironic and excellent advice. It's okay for you to have a glass of wine. Spencer would want you to. I cuddle with Ain, apologize for my recent testiness, for having triaged his needs into obscurity these past several months. He takes my hand, kisses it, and forgives me. I pour that glass of wine and savor it in small sips. Dinner consists of a warm baguette with a wedge of brie cheese. I read for a while, a quiet novel by Wendell Berry, and then head to bed early because I'm tired and because there is nothing noble or pretty about an exhausted martyr. So that's my story, and I'm going to pass it over to Alissa now, my co-editor, who I was about to give up on this book, to be honest. I had a co-editor at the beginning who decided she didn't have the time, and I didn't think I could do it on my own, and I probably couldn't have given what I just read you. And well, of all the contributors that had sent essays in, I asked, is anybody willing to step in and take this other person's place? And Alissa immediately raised her hand and said she would help out. So Alissa, thank you, because without you, this book never would have happened.
So hi, everybody. I'm really delighted to be here, and really happy that you're all joining us virtually. And I hope everybody watching is safe and well at home. I grew up in Washington, D.C., and actually knew of politics and prose when I was like a little kid, and always kind of looked to it with awe and respect. So I'm really excited to be part of this event with Politics in Prose, and kudos to Beth and everybody over there for creatively figuring out how to do this event online. So I want to talk a little bit about how I got involved in this project with Amy, what drew me to it, and then briefly about the themes in the 2 essays that I have in the collection. And then I'll read just a short excerpt from one of my pieces. So basically, I came to this as a psychotherapist, and like Amy's husband, Ain, I started to gearing up for the 2016 election, I started to hear my clients more and more bringing political themes into sessions, which had never happened before in my 25 years of practicing. And how distressed they were by what they were hearing and what they were seeing on TV. So that was a piece of it. And then personally for me as well, I was very upset by everything that I was seeing and hearing. I was raised in a Jewish community about 20, 25 years post-Holocaust, and I was always taught that if I ever saw another people's being demonized and discriminated against, that I had an obligation to speak up and to not stand idly by. So the combination of what I was hearing from my clients and what I was feeling personally led me to become much more active politically than I had ever been. So I started to blog about the intersection of psychology and politics, particularly about the gross narcissism that I see in this president and sadism and the impact that that's having on all of us. As well as the codependency and collusion that I see in his political enablers. And also blogging about some of the themes that were coming up in my practice, which I'll talk about in a minute. So it was that, and then I became involved in a movement called the Duty to Warn, which was founded by Dr. John Gartner, who's actually a Baltimore-based psychologist, who started an online petition, which was eventually signed by 70,000 mental health practitioners across the country. And the idea was that we all felt an ethical obligation to warn that this president is a danger to our collective public health. And of course, we all see what's happening now with this horrible coronavirus situation. But back then, we were really arguing that because of his narcissism, he was not capable of being an effective leader, and we called on Congress to invoke the 25th Amendment, saying that he was unfit for office. We organized town halls across the country, educated Congress people about the clinical term narcissism. You know, we all kind of throw it around colloquially, but really what it means clinically is, you know, that he simply doesn't have the capacity to be empathic. And we've seen that in so many ways. So through my writing and this work, a mutual friend of Amy's and I kind of introduced us to each other online, and then it led to this wonderful book, which I'm so excited to be part of. So I have two pieces in the collection. One is called The Challenges of Being a Psychotherapist in the Time of Trump, and the other is called Trigger Warning, The Supreme Court May Be Dangerous to Your Mental Health. And so a few of the themes that I write about are, first of all, what I'm seeing in my practice. So I'm seeing a few common themes. I'm seeing clients who have, and particularly women clients who have who grew up with narcissistic parents or who are with narcissistic partners. And they're seeing in the president, in his cruel words and behaviors, they're being reminded of the trauma that they grew up with. And this, you know, father of our country is now in this position that he's impacting all of us so harshly. So that's one category of folks that are affected. Another category are sexual abuse survivors, survivors of rape, childhood sexual trauma. And by the way, not just women, also men have talked to me about how they've been impacted from the beginning by the Access Hollywood tape, the president overtly bragging about his predatory behavior, being accused of rape, and then on and on. You know, the Kavanaugh hearings really brought up a lot for my clients, really re-traumatized people in feeling their own trauma and seeing it on the grand scale. You know, they felt, I think many of them felt empowered and hopeful that that Dr. Ford Blasey was speaking out, but you know, it also just was very very emotional for a lot of people. And then finally, I think especially in younger clients, teenagers and young adults, what we're calling eco anxiety or concern about the environment, worries that, you know, will they even have a planet? when they're fully grown? And is it responsible for them to have kids at this point in time, given everything that we're seeing? My colleagues and I like to joke, sort of with dark humor, that Trump has brought jobs back for psychotherapists. We're seeing so many people coming in with anxiety, and the American Psychological Association has actually conducted studies showing the rising rates of anxiety in people across the country. And this was even before the coronavirus, but now, of course, even elevated by all of that. So how I've changed as a psychotherapist during this time, those of you familiar with the therapy process know that therapists are trained to leave our own personal beliefs and opinions outside of the room, to really be able to be what our clients need us to be in the moment with them. But through all of this, I have found, I feel it's even more important to be authentic, especially with clients who are really suffering with everything that they're seeing. So I feel like it's important to give them space to talk about how they're feeling about the politics, to validate it, and to really validate that what they're seeing is not normal. What we're all seeing is not normal. None of this is normal. And then to strike a balance between helping them to take care of themselves, stepping up self-care, stress reduction activities that they do, but also empowering people to become politically active when they feel called to that in ways that work for them. So finally, I just wanted to read the last couple of paragraphs from my piece, The Challenges of Being a Psychotherapist in the Age of Trump. I have realized that since psychotherapists are in the business of promoting communication and interpersonal relationships within our private offices, we have a crucial role to play in fixing our broken system. People on different sides of political issues have forgotten how to debate civilly or even how to listen to one another, much less how to negotiate and compromise. I never imagined that empathy would become a political act, but alas, it has. People on opposite sides of the political divide, as well as people of different cultural backgrounds and faiths, seem unwilling and sometimes unable to empathize with different perspectives. But when we listen deeply to one another's stories, meaning we practice seeing things from another's perspective while silencing the voice inside us that wants to disagree or tell our own side, we learn that we all want the same basic things: a good life for ourselves and our families, good health, an adequate income to provide for our needs, a community to belong to, and a sense of meaning and purpose. When I teach clients to feel compassion for themselves and to empathize with their partners and family members, I hope that I'm also providing them with the skills to empathize with their fellow human beings, whomever they may be. This may be the most important political action I can take in this period in the country's history. So with that, I want to pass things on to Shannon.
There we go. Just took a second to unmute myself. So thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the chance to have an essay in this book and be able to talk to you about it. My essay, I wouldn't say it stands alone, but I'm going to have my explanation at the end rather than at the beginning, like for everybody else. So here's an excerpt from When Parenting and Activism Collide, which is my essay in Fury. This is wrong. This whole day is wrong, I said, banging my phone down on my lap. It was the morning of the Families Belong Together March. Instead of chanting outside the White House about immigrant children being separated from their families, I was in my stereotypical Prius in the DC suburbs with my husband and 2 kids. I ran my hand through my hair and sighed. The work-life balance is a familiar struggle for many parents. I'm lucky that when I leave my office, I mostly leave my job behind. But my responsibilities as a privileged person aren't something I can walk away from. As I read the news about the latest shooting of an innocent Black person, or wildfires exacerbated by climate change, my jaw tightens. Too often, I stop reading because I already know too well the unintentional contributions I'm making to systemic injustices. But at the same time, I never stop being a mom who wants to spend as much quality time as possible with my kids. The seesaw is constantly teetering, the conflicting needs and expectations pulling and pushing. This was just the latest variation on a familiar struggle whenever one of these events arose. Do I bring the kids? Do I leave them behind and miss out on my time with them? Or I stay with them and ignore the event? If I brought my family to this march, images of children in cages would haunt my 5-year-old's dreams. He ran from the theater when the grandmother in the movie Coco yelled at the little boy. I knew I wouldn't have answers for his repeated questions. Why are there children in cages? Why are they away from their families? Why is our government doing this? After all, they are the same questions constantly repeating in my own head. Nor did I want to miss Saturday with my kids. I'm out of the house 5 days a week, heading out at 8 o'clock in the morning and returning 10 hours later. From the moment I walk in the door, when I tuck a fuzzy blanket around my older son, I have only 2.5 hours with my kids each day. Far too much of my knowledge about my kids' weekdays is secondhand. Weekend hours are sacred. At the same time, the stories and images of the separated families played out in my mind, a background newsreel haunting my life. How could I enjoy my family knowing others were going through such pain inflicted by our own government? Among all the world's injustices, this situation planted itself in my mind, resisting all efforts to uproot it. I donated money, called my congressional representatives, urged my loved ones to support the cause. But it didn't feel like enough. I went back and forth, going, not going, going, not going. In the end, I decided not to go. The single deciding factor was the fact that we had made plans with another family before the march had been announced. I didn't want to disappoint both my kids and my friends. But during that phone call in the car that morning, I discovered I had written the plans down incorrectly. It turned out I had no commitment at all. Damn it! I should be there, I thought. But it was too late. The march had started hours before, 20 miles away. Guilt-ridden thoughts swirled. Who are you not to go? You have so much, and others have so little. Don't you owe it to them? I squinted at the bright summer sun coming in through the windshield. There is nothing to see but car dealerships and traffic. Kicking papers on the floor aside, I contemplated that I was failing at being an activist and at keeping the car in a non-disgusting state. There's a saying that change starts at home, but these days it doesn't seem like enough. How much do we sacrifice? What kind of parents are we if we leave our kids right now to go build a better future for them? Yet what kind of parents are we if we don't? How can we love everyone without it becoming a zero-sum game? I've wrestled with these questions both before and after this march. Some days, I feel like I know that I'm doing the right thing. Others, it seems like there's no right thing at all. But perhaps it's not a zero-sum game. That useful adage, show, don't tell, is more relevant than ever when it comes to parenting. Perhaps in showing our children that we care about these issues, we're modeling the type of people we hope they'll grow up to be. We could lecture for hours about morality, or we could demonstrate that commitment to justice with our own 2 feet. I didn't go to the protest that day, but I know there will be more protests in the future. Next time I go to a march or protest, I'm going to tell my kids why I'm going and why it's so important. In some cases, I'll even bring them with me. Perhaps just by being myself, activist and all, I can be the parent I've always wanted to be. So this piece came from the consistent struggle I described in this essay, the push and pull between doing what's right for our families and what's right for the world. And often the world sets it up as this conflict. And while I talk about the Families Remain Together March specifically, at least for me, it's much bigger than that. It's been a struggle for me ever since I've had kids in both the social justice and more for me actually in the environmental realm, where I'm very involved with climate change activism. And it's been true ever since my older son was born, who's almost 7. But it became even more relevant with the Trump administration, The problems took on more significance, more urgency. And the future of our children seemed to take on more significance or more urgency than ever before. But a conversation about environmental issues that I had with a number of parents helped me realize the resolution to this conflict that I described in the essay. I talked to them and asked them, how do you deal with this conflict? In what area do you feel like your environmental values and your parenting conflict? And their answer really surprised me, because almost all of them said they don't. We don't see a conflict. And so I was very confused by this for a little while, because I struggle with this all the time. But upon reflection, I come to the same conclusion that I do in the essay. That yes, of course, it's a balance. There's always going to be something that you have to give up. But in the end, acting morally isn't at odds with being a good parent. And I saw that later on. As it turned out, there were many other occasions after that march to speak up on that subject. That march certainly did not end any of the policies that it protested against, at least fully or adequately. I ended up attending a candlelight protest outside the White House on the same subject about a year later. And while I was there, I did keep thinking about my kids. And yes, I thought about how I was missing dinner with them or not being able to tuck them in. But I was mostly thinking about how grateful I was that I had them and they had me, as I listened to these stories of these families just trying to come and do the best for their kids. And most importantly, I thought about how having that privilege of being together compelled me to be there and stand up what was for right, for both my kids and all the other kids and families like them. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. And on the topic of privilege, I just want to say I feel very privileged to be one among 37 contributors to Fury. And also, I just want to give a shout out to our publisher, Pact Press, which is an imprint of Regal House Publishing. It's a small, independent, woman-run press out of North Carolina. And they really championed this book in a way that I wasn't led to believe was possible by many in the industry, because anthologies are traditionally pretty hard to sell. So I just want to give a shout out to Janie at Regal House and Pam and the whole staff. They've been fantastic. And I see we have some questions, and I think, Beth, do you want to toss those out?
Hi, yeah. Yeah, we have two great questions. I'll encourage our other 103 viewers to submit their questions as we get into these. Oh, yes. First question is from Kimberly. Kimberly is my aunt. I'm really happy that she's tuning in.
Hi, Kimberly.
Says, grateful to you all for writing this book. Cyberbullying has become common to a worrying degree, and 45 so easily inflames and mobilizes his followers via dog whistles or outright attacks. Before, during, or after writing the book, did you have any concerns about the blowback you'd receive? And do you worry about being vocal at a time when many don't feel safe?
We can sort of go around the horn. Yeah, I sometimes, sure. I've been writing op-ed pieces for over 10 years, and a lot of them have, in the last several years, have dealt with Donald Trump, and I think my husband worries about it more than I do. My mom marched in Selma, and she slept in a bus station and marched for 5 days, 12 miles a day, and sleeping in roadside camps. And whenever I get a little bit nervous, I just think about her courage, and that gives me courage.
That's amazing. Alissa?
Yeah, well, it has certainly crossed my mind, especially when, we see that Jewish journalists and activists are being attacked on Twitter pretty mercilessly. But it never was a great enough concern for me to not want to be part of this project, and for me to not continue to want to be writing about it and speaking out. I think, frankly, if this book got the degree of attention that we were in the public eye so much, I would be grateful. So that's where I stand.
Yeah, and then Shannon, please.
So I've been on the internet since I was basically a teenager, way before like a lot of other people my age were. Since 6. And so I've sort of learned over those years to deal with trolls and bullies, and also people who are well-intentioned, have good points, but may not always be in a way that I really appreciate. And to learn from them, and to pick out the useful parts and disregard the less useful parts to learn from it. I have also been a blogger for a really long time. And I'm on Twitter pretty regularly. I have a Facebook following. I'm actually in the parenting realm on that front, which people can also be really vicious about, in a very different way, in a very personal way too. Mm-hmm. So for this book in particular, I wasn't worried about it because I'm sort of have that internet presence already. So I didn't think that this book would be particularly, and I'm like I said, I'm a climate change advocate. So I've certainly had my share of throwdowns with people, climate deniers on Twitter anyway, which tend to be less of a safety issue than say some of the other political aspects, but can still come out of nowhere. So
mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll just add, Beth, that there's several pieces in the collection that mention bullying, and one in particular that is dedicated to Trump's bullying, exclusively addresses Trump's bullying, I should say, and that's by Marianne Leone. And it's actually a rather humorous, but very, of course, serious take. So, if anybody out there is listening who's a Trump supporter, all I have to say is be best.
Dang.
And I guess that's one thing that ironically prepared me. I was bullied a lot as a kid, so I feel like I know how to handle that because I dealt with it in person and not just people online. So that helped too, in a strange, disturbing way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This next question is for Alissa, from Marianne, watching at home. I'm wondering if you can talk about the progression of Trump's mental illness, especially during this pandemic.
Sure, thank you for the question. So what I'll say is that psychologists and psychiatrists, and there have been tens of thousands around the country who have been speaking about the president's narcissism from the very beginning. And part of what they've been warning about is that under crisis and stress, people with Trump's personality structure just crumble and fracture and become even worse. Their symptoms become even more gross and apparent, and frankly pathological. And I think that that's what we've been seeing all along. I mean, that's what we've read about in these various books that have come out from people in the inside who talk about how much chaos exists within this administration and White House. And so I think, we're seeing during this pandemic that, the president was at a loss when it first started, that he continued to lie and mislead the public, as he's been doing all along. But this is even, this is a serious, we all know, I mean, this is a life or death issue. And his narcissism is just getting in the way, of not wanting to admit how bad it is, to not wanting to make objective, smart decisions about it, to pretend that he knows more about public health than even the experts. His negative test is even more negative than anybody else's because he's the best at everything. And frankly, these mental health activists that have been active all along are now calling for Trump to really give up any decision-making around public health issues and to let the experts be in charge, to really turn it over to Dr. Fauci and the CDC and just relinquish that part of his job because he's really just not fit for it. And things are really critical right now.
Absolutely. Thank you. So Stephen, Prison Stephen, listening at home, just asked this great question that I really love. Other than listening, what can men do to help women deal with the stress caused by the policies and behavior of Trump and his cronies? I'll put it to the floor.
I'll take a stab at it. I think listening is important, and I'm fortunate to be surrounded by men. I have 2 adult sons and an adult stepson and a husband, and they are all very supportive of this project and my feminism. And I think what I'd like to see more, though, of all men is not just listening, but taking action. And it's one thing to have empathy for what a woman is going through during these times. And I know that, as Alissa mentioned, men are going through a lot of the trauma as well. And, we're all experiencing trauma with this pandemic. But I think more than just listening, speaking out. One thing I said in an interview recently is, I think it would be helpful for men to read this book because it's like when somebody has toilet paper stuck on their shoe, It's like, I think if a man reads this book, they're going to understand they have some toilet paper stuck on their shoe that they might not have known about if they hadn't read the book. And so we're just doing a kindness for men by sort of pointing out some things that what they maybe, and this certainly is not a monolith, it's not every man, but some things, sometimes I joke with my husband who's in his 70s and he's white, and he's been swimming in water his whole life. He doesn't feel water. And so sometimes he'll say something or do something that's like, hey, no, that's not okay. And obviously things are, very fluid, especially today. Things are changing constantly, and it's kind of hard to keep up with what's not okay sometimes. And so, fortunately, he has me. But even I say, like, stick my foot in my mouth all the time, and then I have my son who's there to correct me, my 27-year-old son. So we all have, the little people on our shoulder. But anyway, I think that we have to be forgiving when people make mistakes and make comments that are hurtful and insensitive, but I think we also need to point those out and not just remain silent. A friend of mine is writing a book about for clinicians about psychology in the Me Too era, and it's a large part of it deals with women being more assertive and speaking their truth. And, at the same time, I would love to see men be more assertive in advocating for women's rights, not just saying, yes, we hear you, but actually sharing the link to this book on their Facebook page or their Instagram, instead of just saying, oh, that sounds like a great book, and not acting on it.
Mm-hmm. You heard it, Stephen.
Yeah, I think along those lines, also ensuring that the women you are listening to are diverse, that it's not just the people who are immediately in your in your personal realm, that you're listening to Black women, to Indigenous women, because they do deal with other issues and other intersections of issues than white women do. LGBTQ folks, really listening to the diversity and what they call passing the mic, amplifying those people's voices, ensuring that they have a seat at the table. If your panel is all men for a scientific conference, for example, maybe you should think about why and how you can change that you don't have a manel, what they call them, and how can you make that more diverse as well. So helping women have more of a seat if you're in that position to do so, and amplifying their voices.
Mm-hmm. And I would add to all of these important comments. First of all, I have been glad to have some men friends and colleagues read this book and appreciate it and help promote it. And I would also say that when you go to the ballot box, to the voting, however we're going to vote this year, to vote, to look to candidates' stances on issues that affect women in terms of health and work-family life balance and equality, because every man has women that they're close to, whether they're partners or friends or sisters or mothers or daughters, and so really we're all in this together.
Amen.
Definitely. This next question comes from Carl. He asks, if you were writing an essay today for the sequel of Fury, about your Fury about Trump's handling of the coronavirus, what would you say? I know you touched on this a little bit, Alissa. So maybe Amy, start us.
Well, I think it's just a continuation of what we've already seen. I mean, I would echo everything that Alissa said. And I think the scary part, again, echoing Alyssa's remarks, is that, he's, what's the term, Alissa, decompensating? Before our very eyes, like the stress is not good for a person in his mental state. And just the idea that up until this president, all presidents prior to Trump have, love him or hate him, have treated everyone as their constituent, not just people from red states or people from blue states, but every American. And that's what strikes me as just, quite frightening that, for instance, California just received a shipment of ventilators. And I think it was around 1,000 ventilators, and they were broken. They were from the National Reserve, and they were released, which is great. But so, they're being fixed in San Jose right now, and they should be ready to be distributed to hospitals within a couple of days. But this was not an accident. So I would say, I would be looking at this notion, if I were to, write an essay, I would be looking at this notion of being a big enough person, which he's not, to represent even those people you disagree with. And again, echoing Alyssa's, the few paragraphs that she read from her piece, that idea of civility and empathy.
Absolutely. Shannon?
Sorry, having trouble finding the mute, or unmute rather. I think one thing that I would probably reflect upon is about how both the Trump presidency in general and this particular crisis is revealing the holes that have always been there. You see a lot of people talking about how bad things are, and of course bad things are bad, but so many of those things that are bad are not new. They're revealing what was already broken and how broken it is, and hoping that people understanding this brokenness will continue to understand it after it's done, after coronavirus, whatever the ending of this is, after the Trump presidency even, this understanding that there's these systemic injustices. And while they have been made far worse by the situation, by the person in charge, they're also built into the system, and it's a system that needs to be fixed. And, to an extent, in parts of it even torn down and rebuilt, not just getting this one particular person out or this one particular crisis solved.
Well, one thing I would like to add, one of the working titles for this book was We Knew, okay? And I think women knew, we were the proverbial canary in the coal mine. We knew before maybe the general public that, long before the election, that this man was toxic. And, it's sad that it's taken some people 3.5 years to notice that he's not wearing any clothes. But thankfully, in some ways, thankfully, that is now, it's dawned on some people that may not have recognized it before. But women saw this coming long before he was elected. We knew what we were getting, and people that said the day after the election, let's give him a chance. I found it very difficult to square that. If you were paying attention, this was fairly predictable, unfortunately.
Absolutely. Alissa, there was one more question for you. As a mental health professional, did you see issues raised among the book's contributors that you had not seen in your own professional practice? I think potentially regarding the president's mental health.
Let me think about that for a minute. That's an interesting question. I don't know if I saw issues raised about the president's mental health that were particularly new. But I guess what I will say is that I was moved reading the essays by some of our contributors who are women of color, Muslim women, lesbian or bisexual. So in other words, women who have a different experience in the world than I do. And even though I may have had clients from, representing various of those demographics and heard some of their stories, being able to read the firsthand experiences of our contributors, sort of just sensitized me even more to some of what they're experiencing, and feeling being made the other, or feeling not seen, or various types of discrimination that they're experiencing. So I think that reading those essays made me even more sensitive. And every story is unique. So even if you've heard a similar story, it's always new to hear somebody else's story.
I'd just like to add, Beth, that there were some people who had some very harrowing stories, and their essays ended up giving me a lot of hope. So this book isn't all doom and gloom. I think one of the greatest things about the book is that it shows the resilience of women, but everybody. And I think it has a message for what we're going through right now. I mean, it has a very powerful message of how to get through really difficult times. And I would also add to what Alissa said, that what was the question again, Beth?
It was asking about if there were kind of issues raised among the contributors in the essays that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So what I wanted to add is that I read, as I mentioned, it wasn't quite 200 essays. Over 200 people sent inquiries, but maybe over 100 essays that we read. And what astounded me was, I just felt I learned so much. I mean, this was a college education, and in the as Shannon mentioned, and it's sort of the intersectional issues that I thought I had it bad until I started reading some other stories, and then I realized my big issue was the Affordable Care Act being done away with because of my children's medical issues. But that really pales in comparison if you think about people who are in cages, or who are being discriminated against on the street. I learned a huge amount about what's happening in our country reading all these essays.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, we don't have a ton of time left for questions. Meg, though, wants to know what's next for each of you in your writerly careers.
I'm working on a memoir based on a podcast I did a couple of years ago for Snap Judgment about a family secret.
That's awesome.
Well, I'm continuing to promote my first novel that I released earlier this year called Living Waters, From Harvard Halls to Sacred Falls. And I recently went through a divorce, so I'm starting to do some writing about that experience.
You can also get Alyssa's first book on Politics and Prose's website. So click on through.
And I'm actually have a book coming out in June. It's an environmental parenting advice book called Growing Sustainable Together. And I hopefully will still be having an event with Politics and Prose when it comes out. So keep an eye out.
I think so too. So finally, to wrap things up, all of you are sheltering as you should be. We're wondering at PNP what you're all reading to get you through these times, whether you're escaping or distracting or digging into that pandemic lit. Maybe I'll start with Alissa. What are you reading?
Well, unfortunately, I'm reading too much news and articles that friends are sharing, and keeping up with friends, which is actually wonderful. Reading emails and posts from friends, which has actually been really, really a great way to get through some of what we're going through. But in terms of to get away from everything, I'm reading Chloe Benjamin's The Immortalists, which I'm enjoying because it's got themes that interest me around life and death and mortality and our purpose in being here while we're alive. So I'm enjoying that.
That's awesome. Shannon?
Before this, I started reading Bell Hooks, Ain't I a Woman, which is very good, but it's very dense. And, well, dense isn't the right word, but it's a lot. It's very heavy, I guess. And I just picked up The Martian because it seems like maybe reading a book about somebody on an alien planet who's stranded there seems appropriate for the times. So
Totally.
I'm reading Strung Out by Erin Carr. Just finished it. It's a memoir I highly recommend. And I'm just starting about halfway through Disappearing Earth by Julia Phillips, which is a novel, and totally loving that. And I just wanted to mention that a previous question about what we're working on. We're hoping to do another in a series of women's lived experiences. So the next one may, we don't know yet when it'll be out, but I'm hoping that we'll work with the publisher to put out a series of books about women's lived experiences. And one topic I'm thinking of is mothers who are raising children with chronic illness.
Fabulous.
Yeah, and I just wanted to share this with everyone. My shirt, if you can read it, the badass woman in me honors the badass woman in all of you. And that includes men because, we all have our yin and our yang.
Our inner badass woman.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Beth.
It was an incredibly conversation. I really appreciate everybody listening to another reminder that you can have the green button down. Thank you so much for being here. Your purchases keep our events going. We're in business. Tonight, later, on our next crowdcast, Professor Matthew Cohen of Great Power Rivalry. Next week on Monday, we have the novel Writing and Lovers. So we hope to see you all then. Thank you, everybody. Stay well read.
Bye, everyone.